The governor of Kaliningrad flew to Moscow on the 2nd of July 2026. He sat down across a table from Vladimir Putin, and he did not ask for missiles. He did not ask for fresh troops. He did not ask for a new air defense regiment for the most militarized patch of ground in Europe. He asked for gasoline. He asked for ferries. He asked the president of Russia to help subsidize plane tickets so that ordinary people living inside Russia's Baltic fortress could still afford to fly home. This is the region that holds the headquarters of the Baltic Fleet. This is the exclave bristling with missile batteries and electronic warfare arrays. The dagger Moscow has pointed at NATO for 2 decades, and its governor flew to the Kremlin to ask for fuel like a man asking a bank to extend his overdraft. Kaliningrad has not fallen. No flag has changed, but what that meeting reveals is arguably more significant than any military defeat. Kaliningrad is a slab of Russian territory roughly the size of Connecticut, wedged between Poland and Lithuania, with the Baltic Sea on its western edge and no land bridge back to Russia. Around 1 million people live there. To reach it overland from Russia proper, you cross Lithuania, a NATO member that has steadily tightened what it permits to transit its territory since 2022. So Moscow built a sea lifeline, cargo ferries running from Ust-Luga near St. Petersburg across to the Port Baltisk, carrying everything from railway wagons to trucks to the fuel that keeps the region functioning. A fortress is only a fortress while its supply lines hold, and the supply lines are under strain. On June 25th, Kaliningrad imposed limits on fuel sales. 30 liters of gasoline per vehicle, 60 liters of diesel. Not a suggestion, a cap. Prices at the pump climbed close to 70 rubles a liter. The governor began prioritizing what the ferries carry, moving what the authorities call, in their own words, life support cargo to the front of the line. Life support cargo. That is the language of triage. That is what you say when you no longer have enough of something and you have to decide who get it first. But here is the part that most coverage gets exactly backward. Ukraine has not been aiming at Kaliningrad at all. Kyiv figured out something more patient and more structurally damaging. It stopped trying to punch the fortress and started targeting the system that feeds it. For months, Ukrainian long-range drones have been flying deep into Russian territory and hitting oil refineries. Not troops, not cities, refineries, the specific, expensive, hard-to-replace infrastructure that converts crude oil into the fuel that runs a war and a country. A Financial Times analysis counted Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries approximately 194 times in the first half of 2026 alone. Independent Russian outlets reported by early July that fuel problems had spread to at least 78 of Russia's 83 regions. Analysts estimated the strikes had knocked out roughly 25% of Russia's total refining capacity. One of the largest oil-producing nations on the planet is importing gasoline from India. Drivers are sitting in queues visible on satellite photography. BBC verified geolocated a line near a town in Zabalkalsky Krai, stretching 4.5 kilometers, more than 600 cars waiting for fuel. Kaliningrad is not a special target, it is downstream. It is catching the same shortage rippling across 11 time zones, except it catches it worse because it cannot truck fuel in from the next region over. Everything has to come by ship. When the national system runs low, the exclave feels the squeeze first and hardest. Then came the 6th of July. Ukrainian drones struck the Omsk refinery. Omsk is Russia's largest single oil refinery, processing north of 21 million tons of crude per year, approximately 10% of the entire country's refining capacity from one facility. It was the last of Russia's 11 biggest gasoline producers that Ukraine had never reached. It was supposed to be safe because of distance. Omsk sits between 2,500 and 3,000 kilometers from Ukrainian lines. Something flew that far. Ukraine's special operations forces confirmed their drones traveled up to the 3,000 kilometers to reach it, the deepest strike into Russian territory since the full-scale invasion began. They hit the primary crude processing unit, the one component whose destruction leaves the entire plant with nothing to work with. Reuters reported, citing industry sources, that the refinery halted operations, and Omsk is not only a fuel producer, it is Russia's sole domestic manufacturer of the catalytic cracking catalysts that other refineries need to process crude. Knock out Omsk, and you do not just lose Omsk output, you threaten the output of every refinery that depends on its components. The economics of this campaign are worth stating plainly. The drones conducting these strikes cost approximately $55,000 per unit. The facilities they are targeting cost billions, took decades to build, and rely on components that are sanctioned and cannot be reordered from Western suppliers. You are trading the cost of a pickup truck for the disruption of infrastructure a nation spent generations building and cannot quickly rebuild. Every strike forces Russia to spend on repairs it can barely source, on air defense systems pulled away from the front lines, on guarding thousands of kilometers of pipeline and processing infrastructure across an area so vast it cannot all be defended simultaneously. Now back to Kaliningrad, because now the pieces fit. For 20 years, this exclave was Moscow outward facing threat, the piece on the board that made NATO planners nervous, the base from which Russia projected power across the Baltic. In the summer of 2026, it has become a liability that consumes resources rather than generating them. Finland joined NATO, then Sweden. The Baltic Sea is now almost entirely a NATO lake. Every ferry route from St. Petersburg to Baltic runs through water monitored by alliance members. The ferries still run. This is not a blockade, but the strategic logic has inverted. The fortress now depends on threading its supply line through a maritime environment where Russia holds almost no advantage in order to sustain a base whose entire purpose was to give Russia advantage there. The dagger still exists, but the hand holding it's also holding a field watcher. Russia is not out of options. It has imported tens of thousands of tons of gasoline from India. It banned gasoline exports to keep fuel at home. Refineries get repaired slowly and expensively, but they get repaired. This is a state under strain, not a state in collapse. What the evidence shows is strain that compounds. Every ruble spent repairing Omsk is a ruble not spent on the front. Every air defense battery repositions to guard a refinery is a battery no longer protecting troops. Every ferry rerouted to keep Kaliningrad's tanks full is capacity not being used elsewhere. None of it is fatal in isolation. Together, it is a slow and component tax on a war machine already stretched. Kaliningrad was not erased. It was not attacked. It was not blockaded. It was revealed as dependent, revealed as exposed, revealed as a consumer of Russian strength rather than a projector of it. Ukraine did that without ever pointing a drone at the place. It did it by targeting the blood stream and letting the extremities go cold, which leaves the question that matters most heading into second half of 2026. If a fortress has to be actively rescued to survive, fed through water it no longer controls, supplied by a system rationing fuel across 78 of its own regions, was it ever really a fortress? Or was it a threat everyone agreed to believe in until the fuel ran low? If this gave you something the headline skipped, share it with one person trying to understand this war past the surface. Subscribe for the analysis that follows the logic, not just the spectacle.